Welcome everyone. If you're looking for information or to hear some folks discuss how you can unlock accessibility to your training, to your lectures, so that you can be successful in transferring that information to adults, you're in the right place. We're going to have a conversation with my colleague, Collazo, who is the founder and the CEO of True Blend Learning. She's been in the business of training adults and from CEOs of big corporations like Canon, and to most recently working with the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, where we had to bring in a consultant like her with her credentials to come in and help us build a program to educate people on something as maybe boring as policies and procedures. So we hope today that you will learn from her experiences and from my perspective also in terms of educating adult learners with the use of technologies and cool tools and so forth. So without further ado, sit back and just listen to what we from years of experience have gathered in working in the field of learning and development with adult learners.
So thank you, Wanda, for your introduction. I'm really excited about being here as well. I think that one of the things we need to get started with is really defining what is accessibility. And from an instructional design perspective, it is how we interact with others, right? How we learn, process information based on our past experiences, based on our roles, based on even if we have physical or mental limitations that impact how we process and relate to information, right? So accessibility are the ways that you're making information accessible and how others are interacting with it.
Now that my colleague has set the ground for talking about accessibility and how we look at accessibility when it comes to adult learning, the three big components that are going to shape our discussion focus around three big components. Learner focused, we're going to consider how it is important to create those environments for learners based on their needs. So focused on the learner. Designing elements in our training that are proactively and intentional to make that learning environment be inclusive of all folks, all learners, and to create and foster a space of psychological safety where people feel comfortable sharing information, interacting with the information to turn it into knowledge, right? To build that knowledge, and how we in our practice have learned from, I guess, failures in terms of how to make those spaces safe and not overpower our learners with too much technology or too many distractions. So that's going to kind of drive our conversation today. So let's begin.
Yeah, it's really around the considerations that you take in prioritizing the needs of your audience to tailor the training specifically to what they need. Looking at the overall learning environment as part of the way in which you're thinking and embedding into what you're creating as opposed to an afterthought. And it's looking at how comfortable people are interacting with your materials and with each other to be able to make that information relevant and applicable to them. So when we talk about how people are interacting and learning with each other, learning new skills, and considering the holistic perspective, you need to imagine a pie cut into four areas, right? So each quadrant is education, exposure. There's a slide that we can share with everyone. So let's bring that up. So look, this is a really good visual of what the quadrants are. So you have education, exposure, the environment, and the experiences. Okay. So when designing training, these are the four key areas you need to consider to have a holistic approach. So embedding accessibility into your design, into the training that you deliver, into the interactions is going to build the knowledge base that you want people to have. Okay. So let's go over these very briefly. Wanda, you want to help us?
Sure. So as you look at the quadrant, you see it's like I call them the four E's, right? So education, exposure, environment, and experience. So what do we mean by education? Education, we address the audience at the point where they are, right? And that's at the point where they have creating the level of detail in the curriculum in the training that is based on the education or technical background and that learner has, right? The participant into your training space. Exposure, offering different ways. People learn in different ways, and offering different ways to learn that information. The next thing is environment, right? Environment, creating that inclusive, accessible learning environment is key. A space where people can feel comfortable to learn and to ask questions. Um, we can be more detailed, more specific in terms of, whether we use e-learning, face-to-face, facilitator-led instruction. In most cases nowadays, you're finding yourself doing virtual instructor-led training. How do you incorporate that environment? How do you create that environment so that adult learners can feel comfortable and learn, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, if you want to cover the last one, Freddie.
Sure. And the experience, right? The points that you're making are really important. But the hands-on experience and the interactivity that you're going to be creating, and you can do so with simulations, with games, with chats. There are like different ways, formal, informal ways of being able to keep people engaged and present with your subject. So it's around building the whole accessibility aspect of it. But this can dive even deeper, right? Because depending on the results you want from the training, you need to have different methods to reach everyone. So, based on your team's needs, you create a combination of learning opportunities, right? Like utilizing the tools in development. So, you're looking for potentially emerging technologies to increase interactivity, right? And the engagement around learning. But that comes from all of the resources that you have available. And so it's really looking at a formula of what is the result that I want to achieve, and then what is the best way of being able to achieve that based on this framework, right?
Yeah. And to add a little bit to that, when I think about us training adults mostly virtually now, we have to be careful to have a good balance between how we enrich the training with technology and not overwhelm the training that we offer with technology, because we don't want to, be so focused on, let's say, AI or introducing a mentee or a poll, using all the bells and whistles that are available to us today and that continue to be available, to become a distraction and to overwhelm the learner, where they no longer feel comfortable because they're confused. Oh, do I have to put something in the chat? Do I turn on my microphone? Do I answer a poll? Like, do I have to go to my cell phone and click something so that I can do a mentee? So we as designers of learning have to take that into account. Just because we know how to use a particular tool, to collaborate, in the training to make it interactive, we also have to balance out. It's like, always go back to the focus of why are we teaching? Why are we doing this training for our learners, for whether they're employees learning on their job, or it's a lecture that we're doing, or an introduction to policies and procedures to our executive teams in our organization.
Yeah, and that's a
I kind of want, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, it's a really important point that you're saying, right? It's um it's around leveraging. Like, how do you leverage all of these resources in a way that makes sense and it's not overwhelming, and that you're not duplicating and repeating messages unnecessarily, but making the right points come across and building blocks come across depending on the different media that you're using, right? So it's having that. So it's looking at leveraging the LMS, looking at social media, looking at knowledge management, the intranet, box, the servers, the overall knowledge management experience and collaboration tools that are available at work. It's looking at chats, games, blogs that are going to be able to enhance the whole experience, right? So it's again looking at now at the communication, and are you including different channels in the way that you're delivering your message, right? Are you using text and audio and video to accommodate different learning preferences, not just one way?
So Freddie, I know that you have a lot of experience in designing webinars at large scale for big organizations where you might have audiences from different countries and different levels within an organization. Um, how do you approach that? Like how do you make sure that you're engaging enough to reach all those different levels or different audiences that have different roles and that have to learn what you're teaching them, right? How do you do that? Like what kind of things have you found in your career that have been helpful when you're advising organizations like us, like Rockefeller Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it comes from knowing the way that people interact with one another. And so it's almost like building blocks. What exactly do I need to know at any one point to be able to achieve the objective that is needed? And be able to be confident in the work that I'm doing, and the in how I'm relating to my clients, I'm relating to peers, I'm relating to the information, and growing professionally and personally as well. And so from that standpoint, from a personal standpoint of what works for me as a learner, then you integrate into what is the messaging and the tasks, the capacities, the competencies that I need to have to be able to do my job. And then looking at the technologies that are available. So it's really going back to that holistic standpoint of what is that framework? How many skills, like what's my educational level or understanding of that skill, right? And how much do I need to dig deeper into the subject? So that determines how it is that you're going to overall interact with the information, and the technology that you're going to use to be able to deliver that message. So part of it as well is in being able to receive and incorporate feedback. It's in looking at the comments that have been received, and then including them as part of the course updates, or even to build new courses. So it becomes a learning. It's a living organism of giving people the basics of what they need, and then leveraging technology, leveraging the internal expertise within your team to then enhance that. And so when it comes to accessibility, it's really around building those pillars that are going to allow someone to take ownership of their learning, but also be able to connect to the right support systems that can then continue growing on those.
So thinking of who the people listening to our discussion, I know that you will probably, folks are thinking, but how do you do it, right? And I'm hoping that we can share some specific cases where we've used different designs, things that have worked for us, and things that maybe had to be tweaked because of the feedback we got from folks, especially when training at scale, when training hundreds of people, right? How do we find that balance between keeping them connected to a virtual learning environment versus making sure that we achieve our learning objectives and that they leave there with some takeaways, or some the tools that they need to do their job, or because I'm always thinking of the learner in the workplace, or a leader in an organization, what they need to know from whatever knowledge or information I'm sharing with them, and how that information, how they use that information that I'm sharing with them or training them on to transfer it over to their staff, to transfer over to their team. Like, you have a lot of experience in that, and if you could share maybe some of your most recent engagements with training and development and with adult learners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the projects that really stand out that you and I worked on together was the travel and expense policy. The topic itself, it can be very boring. So how do you make it engaging and have people relate to it in a different way? So for RPA, we developed live sessions for colleagues and clients. We created the top 10 list, top 10 things to remember, right? So these were guides for people to just go in specifically as to what do I need to remember about these, and what are some of those challenges that I need to be cognizant about, right? We also created the interactive presentation, right, which is a self-paced learning of quality, like Q&A questions. And what's really great is that they were vetted by the executive team, right? And then we also created e-learning courses. So from the live sessions, then we created, made it very easy and distilled the information in such a way that people were able to find the questions very easily. We created a table of content as a part of it that we were able to include as part of the conversations, right? We create and so people were able to go specifically to what they needed as quickly as as we possibly were able to give them that information. So these are some of those things that we have to think through in the overall design of the information that we're delivering.
I wanted to add something because I think it's also important for folks listening in to this talk that you didn't just go into designing tools. You didn't just go into, you have these tools in your arsenal, whatever, that you know how to do e-learning. You can facilitate and train trainers to facilitate webinars, no matter what size they are. But one of the things that you did as with us as your client that was very crucial in the success of this series of webinars that you designed and facilitator with the top branch of the organization, was that you took the time in that process to assess what each individual leader that wanted to accomplish, right? Like, this was a project where we had to train our employees on understanding the policies and procedures that had to do with travel and expense. What could they do? What could they not do? But then you also had to create an environment where it was kind of conversational, and encourage people to ask questions from their leaders in different functions, right? So the way that was designed, it required for you to understand our business. You had never worked, with a philanthropic organization of this, size, or it was, this wasn't a corporation, or this wasn't an academic setting. This was like a more organization where it's business like, but it's also philanthropic focus, right? So how you went about doing that assessment, in understanding, the CEO's perspective, the finance, the CFO's perspective, and my perspective as knowledge management, thinking about making sure that people feel comfortable asking questions. It took time, right? Like, that's part of your process in designing and developing something for the learners, right? Maybe
Yeah.
if you could speak a little bit to that, like what are some of your challenges in that?
I think that it's a combination of things, right? It's looking at what is the overall strategic plan, at least for RPA, for a company. And then where are people in terms of the skills and capabilities to the role? And where's the gap? And then how do you fill that gap? And how do you then leverage the technology that's already in place to be able to make that happen? And doing so in a way that people feel that they are part of that community, that they're part of making it all come together. That it's not just the top leaders telling them, well, these are the policies and procedures you have to follow, but it's really around building trust, building a community where my role is critical in being able to keep the company safe, in keeping my job safe, in decreasing that liability. It's looking at, how do I then take this information and build confidence with from a designer perspective, and then from the receiver, so that I can do my job with confidently, with confidence, where I can represent my company based on the information that they're giving me. So it's multiple variables that you look at it from that standpoint, and then looking at the tools, including emerging technologies, which have made things a lot easier as a way to increase that interactivity and increase that engagement around learning and the resources that you have available.
And just to add to that too, like one of the things that I think was important in making this effort successful and improving people's understanding of travel and expense policies is that the learners were also part of the process, right, of designing. We vetted information and then went back to them and said, is this something you need to know? Is this something your clients in the nonprofit sector need to know about how to process their expense reports? And they would come back and say, yes, but you also need to talk about this. And then you building like frequently asked questions and answers that were relevant to the audience, right? So I remember we created tools that frequently asked questions about travel and expense policy, what credit card can you use? Is an Uber covered? Things that internal staff care about. But then you also created frequently asked questions and answers that was vetted by our internal staff who work with clients in the outside because they had other needs. They were like more international. So they looked at travel and expense policies a little differently. And so you had to answer some questions that they had that you could have only gotten that information by vetting your frequently asked questions and answers with the people inside the organization that work with the outside clients. So it was like you were like always keeping the eye on the prize in terms of training our organizational staff of hundreds of people, but also recognizing that one of the webinars that you designed had to be inclusive of the perspective of the client outside the organization, people who we provided services for, right? And making it accessible to them um, by you might creating a specific frequently asked questions and answers, a specific webinar that was more tailored to the outside client who had to learn the travel and expense policy. So that was how challenging was that? Like how do you feel
I know
about
it
that?
was fun to be able to decipher. It's almost like this code, right? This whole puzzle, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way of putting the pieces with the resources that are available. And then to your point, we also added office hours, and we created surveys, right? And we wrote articles for the newsletter, to keep people in the know and keep the excitement around this is your team supporting you in this learning process. And it's not just us telling you this is what the rules are, but it's a partnership that we need to build among each other.
Yeah, and part of the design, I remember also that we created an email where people like could ask questions, right? No matter, who you are, like ask us and monitoring it that monitoring that email so that if new questions came or questions came because something was not clear in what we explained during the webinar,
Mhm.
being vulnerable enough to say, hey, we missed this in the webinar. Let us clarify. Look at this. We have another tool that clarifies this policy better, right? And I think that it made it iterative, where like, okay, we have frequently asked questions that we designed in July. Well, it's December now, and some things have changed or some needs have arisen. How do we keep that communication open and be open to change the information or update the information that we shared originally, let's say in July.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an important point that you're making because, are you including the different channels of communication? Are you including text and audio and video to accommodate different learning preferences, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, all of these were all inclusive, right? So someone who has, if you follow the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's a couple of things that you need to consider as well as the for the overall experience. One of it, of course, from an instructional design standpoint, is the overall layout and the other rules of visual and content design that you need to consider, and how learning theories and how you apply these to having an overall good relation and the information that you're giving and how people are receiving and processing that information and applying it. But when you look at it from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you also look at it from the technical standpoint. So do you have is your audience using screen readers, right? Do you need to have audio as a part of the interaction? Do you want to have captions, reading captions, right? Or do you want to have someone printing the transcript? There's a Canon USA has a really good, really amazing sales training program, um, because they strongly consider accessibility and of learning for people with disabilities. And
Mm,
these are some of the things that they include. They have the captions as part of the e-learning courses, and they consider the screen readings. They allow for people to be able to print the transcripts, so that they can have the information in front of them. They consider the modified inputs like a mouse or a pad only, a keypad only.
mm.
And then how do you navigate through these activities? And so if you have an activity in front of you where you have multiple boxes, so you have different columns, you need to design the training in such a way that is logical, where the pointer walks through in a logical way whatever interactivity you have in front of you. And then the audio is also complementing where the natural flow of the information is. The same thing as color usage. That's another one of those considerations, looking at the overall contrast um, within the overall design. So yeah, so these are definite, from where you're saying, human side of it absolutely included as part of the overall design, but also some technical considerations, to be able to then to create the holistic approach, right, to accessibility.
So I guess, listening to you, we can talk about this for hours in terms of, all the tools that are out there for designing and all the technology and so forth. And I'm all for technology, but it also, some of the things that we've discovered in our experiences doing designing for adult learners, um, and making it accessible to them, or maybe the word is making the training personal to them, so that they say when they go back to their offices, they can say, oh, okay, that training talk speaks to me because so and so travels a lot for the organization and has expenses, and that's my reality as well. So I think part of the training that we develop to make it real for adult learners, especially when they have a lot of, different things going on at the same time, is the storytelling that occurs, or as I call it, like kind of like the Oprah interview effect. Part of the things, the most important thing that I remember from this project was that we the way you designed the webinar was kind of like an Oprah interview. It's like, having a conversation with the leaders and having the leaders go back and forth and say, well, yeah, I understand that people need to fill out this form online, but what if they have this situation? And a lot of the stories that we shared in the webinars and the situations that occur were intentional. Like, we practiced to talk about them because they were intentional, because we wanted people to see themselves in the training, to see themselves in the importance of learning this policy and procedure, so that if they get stuck in an airport and they don't have a credit card, that we as an organization have other methods of paying for those expenses, and that they will be reimbursed, that we would take care of them, right? That we knew that there were snowstorms and maybe they'll have to take an extra night in a hotel, like making it real for people. So sometimes, like, we try it again, because I'm a technology person. So we try to use all the AI or the bells and whistles, but in order to get people to connect to learning and to adapt, the new ways that we're telling them to behave, part of it is reaching them at that personal level, right? Am I wrong? I mean,
No, you're
talk to me a
absolutely
little.
right. And that's exactly what we wanted to do with the overall design. Make it so that it's not leadership versus, employee. This is a relationship that is fluid, right? That it's 360, if you will, right? That is organic, that it's enhancing, you're getting the buy-in from the very, very top leadership, and you're having them say yes. I agree with this. These are the ways that the policies are going to move forward. We are on this together. I come up with a question that is pressing to me, from a client standpoint, right, or for an employee standpoint. I shouldn't feel any type of restrictions in terms of being able to approach any leader within the organization and say, hey, what do you recommend? Maybe we need to reconsider this policy, the way that it's written, so that it's inclusive of these other things. And I think that that's one of the really amazing things that our PA did, which was to really listen to the feedback that we received during those conversations and make changes to the policy and make updates and include those as part of the overall routine of doing business.
Yeah, and one of the things that also that you helped us do after every webinar that we hosted, we had like a little debrief. It's like, and then we took things, again, like, it's a process of, when you design instructional design, you also have to redesign and then go back and say, oh, that didn't work, let's try it this way. And I think the debriefs that we had after every webinar, the debrief happened in two ways. It happened live, virtually, and it also happened via email, right? Like, for example, one of the leaders said, oh, Wanda, you and Freddie did great in this area, but can you add this topic? We didn't address it. And like, taking the feedback from our own speakers, because we had like 5 different speakers that we had to like navigate and ask questions of to cover all the bases, all the themes, and getting feedback from them, but also getting feedback from the audience via emails. So we created this space where it was safe, for the leaders to come back to us and say, can you do this? Can we want to really reach the audience, and a question came in that webinar that we didn't think about? Let's make sure we cover that, at least in the FAQs, or in the next webinar. Like, we might have 2 or 3 days in between webinars, but hey, if it's a need of the audience and they need to know this policy and procedure, let's see what we can do to make sure we fix it, that we address it. And I think that we as instructional designers, we have to be careful not to get stuck in like, this is the way I want to teach this thing. This is, it's like, we might have to shift a little bit because this audience is new, or, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think that was key.
It was, and you're making really important points, right? Because when you look at the overall life cycle, right? Of what it is that, from a designer's perspective, what it is that you're looking to do. You're assessing, you're adapting, you're delivering, and then evaluating at the very end, right? So what's the knowledge base of the people you're looking to train, right? What information is most relevant to them, um, based on how they work? What's the most natural way for them to receive the information? And then, did it work, right? So it's asking yourself those very basic questions, so that when you are designing the information, you're really being inclusive of everyone's needs, and that of your, including the one of the organization, right? And including the clients, including internally how it is that you're going to build that infrastructure to be able to build the inclusivity as well.
Yeah. So, well, one of the things that I think also is important in terms of accessibility, and it's not, it's something that creates that safe space, I guess, again, for adult learners who have limited time to learn. Let's not, avoid the elephant in the room. How, like, what tools do you use to engage people? We talked a little bit about the interview methodology, how we create this webinars, but what other tools are available as a instructional designer that have worked for you in terms of engaging and making the environment fun to learn and playful? Because I know you also work with like gamification and things of that sort. Can you speak a little bit to that in terms of engaging the learner?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it, we tend to overthink the tools that we're using. If we keep things simple, sometimes it's better to use a PowerPoint presentation, or and build animations that then you can update on a consistent basis regularly, without necessarily having to go into Camtasia or Captivate or Rise or any of these other e-learning tools, right? So it's keeping it as simple as possible, so that each department takes ownership of the content itself. And if there are any updates, those are taken care of fairly quickly, as opposed to having to go to a third party, or needing to go to a person that has a specific skill. So it's different ways of delivering your message. E-learning, but it can be a virtual instructor led, it can be informal coaching, it can be on the job training, peer reviews, any type of interaction that you can have with someone where your skills and capabilities and confidence is going to increase. Those are the type of learning opportunities that you want to include throughout all of the sessions. Another part of it is introducing challenges. So, for example, from this conversation, right, can you think of 3 things that you would consider or include in your current project, or in a future project, that would help enhance the accessibility to everyone? Right? So hopefully the answer is yes, I can include a series of things as a part of that. And then is looking at it from a continuous improvement standpoint, right? Encouraging that ongoing assessment, the evaluation, the accessibility practices that you have in place, and figuring out how to integrate that feedback into the outcomes that you want to have.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking of some of the things that have been really useful to me as a client, or as I always learn from consultants, right? I learned a lot from your process, in that once the training is done, it's like, how organized is the information that was gathered from all that training, all the feedback, all the different elements that the components that you added to this webinars. It wasn't just a one-stop deal. It was like collateral, like it was built. It's like
Where
a
do you
campaign.
keep
It's like
them,
a
right?
marketing.
For internal development
Yeah.
versus client versus, yeah.
That had to be a very thoughtful process, because in our organization we're still developing our LMS. So we're educating hundreds and hundreds of people without a learning management system. So we're getting one, but but when we did this for us, we didn't. So it was like we relied a lot on your knowledge management structure experience, right? Where you said, okay, Wanda, how do you make this accessible to people after, people who are coming to the organization in the next year, let's say January 2024, you did this in 2023, and you created this structure where everything was organized in a way that was easily accessible, where it was just links that people could go to, right? But with still protecting the integrity and the cybersecurity of our organization, because we're dealing with outside, learners, also people who were not inside the organization. Talk a little bit about that, like the knowledge management aspect of training, because of course, I work in knowledge management, so that's important to me because people are becoming more and more aware in organizations of the need to keep information somewhere where it's accessible to folks, and it's not, I don't want to say torture. It's not, a whole different thing just to find this information that you need to do your expense report, for example. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's very tricky, being able to design training considering the way that people interact with technology. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're building a knowledge management system. You're figuring out what's the best, how do I want people to access information? And is it easy for them to be able to get what they need when they need it, to be able to get the job done when it's needed to be done? So it's this really delicate balance, right, of the tools that you use for collaboration, for the videos. How do you want to store these files for development, for the clients, right? And then you have into security issues of a document being disclosed or being placed in a place that shouldn't have been placed. So you have,
Mhm.
or being shared, right? So you have a link and you send it to someone, and now that link is being shared with other individuals that are not part of the network. So there are very critical things that you need to consider as a part of it. Um, it's part of the overall design, figuring out how do I, if I don't have a learning management system, how do I build the structure so that once we have the learning management system, we can then migrate and keep track of who's taking care of what and when, who has completed which courses and when. Are there certain certifications that need to be updated on a consistent basis, that I need to keep track and announce and keep abreast of, for a liability standpoint from a company, right? So you look at all of these pieces, and it's a really big task. What's in front of you, trying to figure out what's the best way, and the tools and the training that come with it, and the support systems that come with that, to make this information accessible in the fastest, easiest way possible.
Right. And it has to be intentional. Like one of the things, challenges that we have as we're designing any kind, you're a manager, um, you're a professor, and you want to share some information, with your learners,
Yeah.
making sure that you embed like knowledge management priorities, right? That you embed that in your design, that you're thinking about like, okay, once these webinars are over or once my lecture is over, how can I support the learner moving forward in a way that they can find the information easily, like maybe you can't put everything in the LMS because, but you can direct people to other links or other information that supports that learning, that supports that topic that you're covering. So it's like about embedding, you mentioned about embedding accessibility principles. Well, embedding knowledge management principles to when you're designing. There's a lot to put on our plates as designers of learning for adults. Um, but that's part of it, how can, because the whole idea is like we went back, it has to be learner focused. You always have to think of the learner in your head first before you design anything else, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And once you have a learning management system, the the game changes, right? Because now you can create learning paths. Now you can create curriculums. You can assign feedback specifically to that. You can attach the overall performance for an individual um, from an LMS and now tie it into 360 reviews, to promotions, to HR practices. So there are different ways in which you can keep track and manage learning overall, but also create experiences where now as a leader I can go in and I have a library of resources that are specific to the information I need to be able to support my team. So you can create all of these pieces and have them as part of the overall structure of employee development um, within the learning management system. But to even get to that point, you need to have the right infrastructure in the knowledge management system as well.
We're coming, we could have a whole other workshop just on knowledge management. But I didn't want to end this, this discussion without also, we talked about accessibility and design and being inclusive, but what about, like, we talked a little bit about, an audience being from different countries, having different roles, having different needs to learn the material. What about in terms of like cultural diversity, and what things as an instructional designer do you make sure that are incorporated in that design that address DEI and learn in that learning environment?
That's a great question. We can have another conversation just on DEI and instructional design. My thought is that you need to make your design center around the learner to accommodate for their roles, their needs, their backgrounds, right? And there are a couple of things that you can consider in including into your projects to incorporate DEI principles into it. One is to do a needs analysis, or to take the information you already have and distill it so that you're able to understand the different needs, the preferences, the prior knowledge of the people who are going to be taking your course, right? And this considers the language proficiency, the cultural background, the socioeconomic status, the disabilities, the learning styles, all of these things that are going to make your design as relevant and connecting as possible. Another way is to create multiple ways to experience the content, with case studies, with scenarios, using images and videos, other multimedia that reflects the diversity of the community at work, right? You can also
Yeah.
create a couple of other things, right? Like learning paths, or write in explicit language and communications to your audience. Um, you can also incorporate principles like the high road, right? These are employer practices and policies, strategies, and actions to prioritize the well-being of the employees, right? To provide fair treatment, equitable opportunities for promotions. And so your learning design needs to create a positive workspace for colleagues and even for yourself to feel valued and respected and empowered. Right? So when you consider these things and the overall strategy for DEI in the workplace, then you're really looking at the job quality practices, at building consistency within those practices, at building transparency with job requirements, for example, or looking at the recruitment and the promotion practices and seeing how you're able to focus on improving your business from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, and overall your workplace practices.
So I haven't run out of questions, but I do, understand we have a limited time to talk about this. You bring it home, Freddie. Like, what are some, the three nuggets? You always speak about nuggets of information, nuggets of knowledge that you can share with us, because you've been in this industry for a while, and and even I've been in learning and development and project management for a minute also, but I'm always learning. from your experiences. So what are some of the nuggets that you can share and leave with us today?
Yeah, it really goes back to that first conversation when we got started, about building your training around being focused on the learner, prioritizing the needs of the audience, and then tailoring accessibility, and the strategy of accessibility according to that.
Things that happen organically because we're in this hybrid world of sharing information, playing with that, like being flexible, adopting, the new way of training,
And
it's also key.
that's exactly it, you know. It's being flexible. It's not about somebody walking you through and reading the content of a e-learning course or present. No, it's what is it that you're adding on to it beyond what's on the slide, right?
Yes, not reading the slide. Yeah. Oh, okay, so on that note, I think, we'll wrap this up. I think, Freddie, if you could make sure, we want to make sure that people know how to reach you as well. And if they want to reach me for any reason as well, I'm always
Yeah.
open to sharing anything that I've learned throughout my
And
career.
you have so many contributions, like, with the projects that you've worked on with, Rutgers University as well. And so it's a body of work that show the commitment that we have to accessibility, and that's important to have, right? Because when you look at the overall success of adults, in any learning environment, it requires a holistic approach that prioritizes the diverse needs, the preferences of the learners as well. So it's having that level of commitment, that knowing that people learn in different ways, and so I'm going to make sure that we're tapping onto those, and leveraging technology to be able to make that happen. Yeah, so it's looking at it from that standpoint, making the design, um, centered on the learner, leveraging the
Mhm.
frameworks, right, that you have to build the right environments for people to receive and learn the information. Is creating that inclusive and supportive learning, as a community, not as just one person reading a document and going through 45-minute webinars, but
Mhm.
it's making it very specific to them, and then taking their feedback, and really making something out of that feedback, not just putting it in the shelf somewhere, and letting it collect dust. Um,
Mhm. Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so with that, I think we're done.
Thank you, Wanda. This was a really, really great conversation. It's an important topic, if you think about it, and to be able to start building awareness around it. I know that a lot of seasoned instructional designers already know some of these things, and we're already embedded, this way of thinking into how we design and build training. Um, but sometimes it's a good thing to talk through it, and to hear, like, to be reminded of these key principles, right? This framework that makes it possible for us to create something that is, that's really inclusive and that addresses everyone.
Yeah.
Wanda and I want to thank Rutgers University and their online conference team for the chance to share this information with you. We're happy to continue the conversation about ways to embed accessibility into your strategic plan, to your learning and development plan. Thanks for joining us. Our information is on the slide if you'd like to reach out to us. Thanks.